And hello, everybody. Thanks for attending our Zoom recording presentation of our panel. And we look forward to a live dialogue with you over the internet on the day of our panel presentation. And I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow panelists, Dr. Allison Welch, Professor of Biology at the College of Charleston, Dr. Kate Millay, who teaches in chemistry, and Dr. Blake Scott, who teaches in international studies. And my name is Todd LeVasseur. I actually direct the Sustainability Literacy Institute at the College of Charleston, which is the home of our quality enhancement plan, Sustainability Literacy, as a bridge to addressing 21st century problems. And that's the context, institutional context of our presentation today. And our panel is, as you can see here, moving beyond disciplinary fragmentation and teaching environmental studies and sustainability. So some lessons learned from this project at the College of Charleston, where we're all employed. And important to have the institutional context of this project and the funding behind it. This is part of our reaccreditation. We are in the Saxia-C region of the United States. There's over 800 colleges and universities that peer review one another. And one of the things that are part of our standards in this region is a quality enhancement plan, and it has a core requirement attached to this and a core standard attached to this. And what emerged in 2016 is this project, Sustainability Literacy, as a bridge to addressing 21st century problems. And it's a project that is an effort to shift the teaching culture at the College of Charleston to foreground the triple bottom line of sustainability, social, environmental, economic systems across the curricula. It's a 10-year project, 5 years of sustained assessments and funding, and then the last 5 years, it's embedded into the culture. And so this lets us have improve our student learning around an internally identified need, which was lack of sustainability literacy in our student body, and an opportunity to use accreditation to shift the teaching culture of our campus. Here is the core requirement 2.12. You're welcome to pause this recording if you want to actually look through this box. Again, this is just background, not essential to where we're going in this presentation. Here's a little overview of the comprehensive standard. What's important to recognize in this, though, is that we have to fund this. It's an internally funded project. And so this fed into the incentives I was able to offer as director to colleagues around campus to actually take on teaching sustainability literacy in their classes. So my colleagues who you'll hear from here in a bit, they all receive some ad pay for their time. So really important. We'll talk about in our live chance together, how do we incentivize faculty engagement around taking on new teaching responsibilities. Luckily, we were able to fund that through the requirements of this QAP project. So sustainability literacy, we define at the College of Charleston through this project as having the knowledge and skills to advocate for resilient social, economic, and environmental systems. Again, the knowledge and skills, that's the literacy part. To advocate, so we want our students to be advocates, and you see this on the pathway of engagement on this slide. Right? We want them to be able to be educated, to express what sustainability is, to be empowered to advocate for resiliency in social, environmental, economic systems. That's the triple bottom line that gets them to sustainability literacy. And the project has 5 goals, 7 learning outcomes, 39 measures. It's a very large project. I'm the director. We had some fellows, faculty fellows that got course releases and ad pays to help assist. I'm an assessment team, which Dr. Welch has been on since day one. And I write annual reports on all this, and it mirrors our goals in this, mirrors Bloom's taxonomy. So we want our students to start with the awareness of what sustainability is, the triple bottom line, and work their way through this project to the higher level learning outcomes and goals, often in classes, about students advocating for resiliency, right? They can design solutions to sustainability problems and find where they can fit into systems to advocate for solutions to 21st century problems. I'm not going to spend time on this slide. Again, you can pause it and look through these. They do build on each other. Because sustainability literacy is such a broad topic and concept, we actually had annual focusing mechanisms, our CFC Sustained Solves themes. This was voted upon by faculty, students, and staff around campus. The first 3 years were based on the big ideas of sustainability. Years 4 and 5 came from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so the faculty you're about to hear from, my colleagues, they all were part of a cohort in year 4 where we all talked about in our respective classes, global warming and climate change. So in theory, a student who took 3 or 4 maybe classes last year, attended some events, they would have been exposed to the triple bottom line and that year's focusing theme of global warming, climate change in a variety of disciplinary contexts, and started to hopefully make interdisciplinary bridges and understanding about the causes and solutions of global warming through a sustainability lens. Over the 5 years of the project, we are entering into year 5, but all the training's been done. We've had faculty from at least 34 departments get trained in how to teach sustainability literacy and scaffold it into their class in either a sustainability focus course. This comes from AESS. Basically, the whole course is around sustainability, the triple bottom line, that theme, or a related course where sustainability is scaffolded into a larger course through a units or some readings and lectures. So it's a third of the course content. And as you can see, each year we've had more students impacted. That's what the graph is on the left bottom. There are students in sustainability related courses compared to sustainability focused courses. We had more students in year 4. We switched to a tier 1, tier 2 cohort model. Years 1, 2, and 3, we trained faculty as a single standalone model, and they taught in a semester. This year that just wrapped up, our year 4 academic year 2020-2021, we created a tier 1, anybody can teach. There's no assessment involved, just learn a voice thread. What is sustainability, sustainability literacy, the key competencies of sustainability coming from VEEC in 2011, and start teaching that in your class and we'll count the course. Tier 2 was a year-long cohort. We had not done this before, where we met every month over a whole year and trained together and shared readings and lectures and discussions over a whole year together. How do we effectively teach to these SLOs? So we started looking at assessment data as it came in over the year and built our trainings around that. And so the 3 colleagues of mine you're about to hear from all engaged in this for the first time cohort of 24 faculty across the curricula, all focused on teaching sustainability literacy around the theme of global warming and climate change. And so I'm actually going to hand it over to Dr. Allison Welch, who will share her experience in doing this the whole length of the project, but specifically last year's tier 2 from the context of biology.
All right, thank you, Todd. So I am Dr. Allison Welch, and I'm a faculty member in our Department of Biology, and I'm also affiliated with our undergraduate program in Environmental and Sustainability Studies at the College of Charleston. So I'm going to approach this as kind of a personal narrative about how I came to find an interdisciplinary approach and find value in an interdisciplinary approach. And in particular, I'm going to talk about my experiences teaching disciplinary courses. And so for me, that's biology, as well as interdisciplinary courses, and how in particular, my disciplinary teaching has been informed by my experiences with interdisciplinary teaching and my interactions with colleagues from diverse disciplinary backgrounds. In the context of the interdisciplinary initiative, which is the QEP that Todd has just introduced. And from my presentation, there are kind of 2 take-home points that I want to get across. The first is the value of giving students opportunities to do interdisciplinary thinking, both in their disciplinary courses and, when possible, in interdisciplinary courses and programs. And the second take-home point is the value of the kind of interdisciplinary faculty collaboration and networking and support that has been developed through the QEP as a means to help faculty develop and offer these kinds of interdisciplinary thinking opportunities for our students. Okay, I can go to the next slide. All right, so as far as a personal narrative goes, this kind of captures my journey from undergraduate to beginning a faculty position. So as most students, when you're starting undergrad, we're trying to find our path. And we're not necessarily thinking about these as disciplines, but as a major and perhaps a career choice. And it's this process of narrowing it and becoming more and more specialized until by the time you're finished with PhD and postdoc and finally in a faculty position. My landscape was just biology, okay? So, and that's all I can see. I can't even see any of the other paths. They're behind me, they're in the past. But what I can see is I can see the whole, world as far as I can tell from this perspective of biology. And so starting a faculty position, I'm thinking, wow, it'd be really fun to get to that hilltop where I can, from my perspective in biology, look out at the world and teach some interdisciplinary courses and use my biology perspective to think about various different issues. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. All right, so when I started thinking about opportunities to teach interdisciplinary courses, of course, there are some obstacles. The biggest one for me as a new faculty member was that there were not many opportunities to offer interdisciplinary courses. I was hired by a large department with a large number of majors, and I was hired to teach courses for our biology majors. And so there weren't many opportunities for me to find time for interdisciplinary courses. In addition, our kind of campus culture doesn't have a lot of interdisciplinary courses. There are a few kind of, from my perspective, special opportunities to offer those interdisciplinary courses, but my bread and butter was the biology courses. So that was an obstacle for me. Another perceived obstacle that I had was that within my courses, as teaching in particular a course that was a foundational course for biology majors, there were disciplinary demands that needed to be met. There was biology content I needed to teach. The course was also tasked with teaching students some foundational skills that they would need to take with them into their upper level biology courses. And that to me felt like it didn't leave time for doing any interdisciplinarity. And then the other kind of perceived obstacle was from my narrow expertise in biology. And in the case of the course that I have taught the most and that I'm going to talk about today in biology, it's called Biodiversity, Ecology, and Conservation Biology. And so there are some interdisciplinary kind of points of contact with that course, but I didn't feel equipped to step outside of my biology training. And I did not want to be perceived in kind of our culture at a state-funded institution as overstepping my bounds as a person from the natural sciences and, you know, trying to indoctrinate students into a political point of view or something like that. So I wanted to stay within my expertise and my comfort level. All right, next slide. Okay, so my path took some big kind of an evolution starting, I would say, in fall of 2016. So if you think back 4+ years ago, there was a lot going on in fall of 2016. And I was teaching my biodiversity, ecology, and conservation biology class, new IPCC reports, a lot of doom and gloom. And we'll talk more about this, I think, with Dr. Malay's presentation. And the students were really down. And then a major societal transition happened with the election, and there were lots of emotions, and it was a very politically charged moment. And I felt that I needed to do something different because the students were not happy, or at least some of them were not happy. So we scrapped the lesson plan, and I came up with another lesson to try to kind of take a stab at interdisciplinarity and at trying to think about kind of hopeful solutions for the future to try to get beyond that doom and gloom. And so what I came up with was, rather than me projecting any of my opinions, I gave students an array of readings that they could choose from so that they could come in for a discussion with informed opinions. And there were some ground rules, no science denialism, because this is a science class. But beyond that, and they had to use the readings that I had selected, and I purposefully selected a fairly wide variety, mostly from the popular press, so that, you know, I was hoping students with maybe different political bents could find something they felt comfortable with as a way to think about moving forward in a positive way and with regards to climate conservation and so on. And it was mostly successful. Students enjoyed the activity. They liked the chance to open up. I was a little disappointed, though, with that first run that they did not do deep interdisciplinary thinking. They were still really approaching the world as biology students, and if just people would listen to the scientists, we wouldn't have these problems. That's the issue. They need to listen to the science. And so the next step in this evolution of mine was interdisciplinary opportunities. So around that time, the QEP started, and I also started being involved with the Environmental and Sustainability Studies program in our undergraduate program. So that's an undergraduate minor that I'm currently the director of. And so these two kind of changes in my professional landscape gave me many more opportunities to interact with colleagues across a broad range of disciplines. And the real outcome for me was what I'm going to call disciplinary humility. I really changed my perspective from thinking that I, as a biologist, could shine this biology perspective on all these problems to recognizing how much I and my students could learn from people in the humanities and social sciences about how we move beyond these problems, because no, we don't need to just listen to the scientists, then we need social changes and policies and so on. So how do we get there? So really embracing kind of what I'm now thinking of as a true interdisciplinary approach. And then finally, this past year, Todd mentioned our Tier 2 cohort. And I'm thinking of this as a kind of a push. So one of the challenges for the Tier 2 cohort, and most of us were people who had been involved in the QEP in previous years. And the goal was to get us to engage more deeply through these sustained interactions. And we were also asked to do some faculty exchanges and invite people into our courses. And this is where I was like, but wait, I've got all this disciplinary stuff I have to do. Do I really have time to invite colleagues in? And so what I came up with was, yes, I'm going to do this. I committed to do this. And we did a panel with colleagues from 3 different disciplines, and it was very successful. And I think in retrospect, thinking about this, this was another way of inviting multiple perspectives into the classroom. And in this case, in retrospect, what the message is I'm telling students is we should ask people from other disciplines to share their perspectives about the problems we care about. All right, so we can go to the next slide. So just some of the things I've learned through this process. I mentioned at the outset some of the obstacles that I perceived. And so yes, at our campus, there are not as many opportunities, particularly in a large science department, to offer interdisciplinary courses, but there is an opportunity to infuse interdisciplinarity into our disciplinary courses. And what I think I've concluded from my experience is that the interdisciplinarity in my disciplinary course does not take away from my students' training as biologists. Rather, it enhances their training because they're learning how biology interfaces with other disciplines, and they're gaining clarity on the boundaries of disciplines. So this is a way they can think about what it means to be a biologist versus a sociologist versus a political scientist, which they may not be thinking of. They're just, many of them thinking biology is the path to the job they want. All right, and then the third obstacle for me was my narrow expertise. And what's helped with that for me is inviting multiple perspectives, both from the students and from faculty colleagues. All right, so lessons along the way. From my position now, I see that there's real value to students, getting them engaged and empowered to think about real world relevant problems and the skills they gain for navigating complexity and using systems thinking by having to engage different disciplines. And then of course the QEP and the Tier 2 faculty has been crucial for allowing that to work for me with these sustained interactions with colleagues from diverse disciplines and the focus on teaching. So kind of what I'm thinking at this point is on the left, we see where our students start. They think they're finding a path and they think these paths diverge. And then in the middle, this is what I experienced as a faculty member, that our paths are overlapping but separate. Okay, we're thinking about some of the same problems, but each still within our disciplinary bounds. And then with the sustained faculty interactions, we can merge those perspectives, but not just kind of into an undifferentiated, merging, but in a way that we can kind of refract our differences, compare and contrast, and really learn from each other's disciplines to better address these problems and better serve our students. All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Blake Scott, and my presentation will focus on my work with the Sustainability Institute and specifically my background as an historian. And I mentioned specifically that I teach in international studies at the College of Charleston, and specifically that the College of Charleston is a public university on the Southeast Atlantic coast of the US. And the university's location very much is part of my interests and understanding of environmental issues. It informs my teaching and my research. And currently how I think about my work as an historian of environmental history in the Caribbean in particular. And I think about environmental history, the basic definition of how and why our relationships with the natural world have changed over time. And I take to heart the idea that, quote, studying the past can suggest guidelines for the future, it can play a role in policy formation. That comes from Carolyn Merchant. I also would add that it can inform how community activism and awareness of environmental challenges from the past can affect the present. And here in Charleston, where we live and teach, we're surrounded by a vast coastal region of rivers, salt marshes, and estuaries known as the Low Country, which essentially was essential not only to human activities like tourism and the fishing industry, but also here in the Low Country, we share a transnational environment with communities from Canada to the Caribbean to South America. The same birds and marine species that migrate every year across the Americas, from sparrows to sandpipers to herons and egrets, also inhabit and migrate here in the Low Country. So we don't have to go far to see nature and the effects of climate change and human-induced environmental decline. But when I teach environmental issues with students and community groups, I try to ground climactic and big environmental issues in everyday interactions and experiences. Rather than just think about climate change and fossil fuel use, we consider the Anthropocene in its diverse and interconnected intimate forms, inductively from the ground up. This is from my training in history. For instance, here in Charleston, I remind students that flooding is both a global and locally caused problem. Although the city is actively suing the oil industry for climate change and global warming, we also have to remember that well over half of the peninsula where the historic city is located is built atop reclaimed land, essentially filled in salt marshes. The city removed tidal creeks and thousands of acres of spartina grass to extend the boundaries of the city. So of course, as the water rises because of global warming, it returns to its historic watersheds, even if we built roads and homes atop them. And as an historian, I focus on the context of environmental problems, its specific history, as well as its linkages to global political economies. And I encourage my students to consider that history as well, and consider, as Donna Haraway posed, what tools do we need to move towards a more equitable, sustainable future for all people, species, and ecosystems? And specifically, what stories do we need to tell and hear? And to tell perhaps a more just story, it requires interdisciplinary thinking. And as I argue here, a multi-species way of studying and interacting with the world, combining environmental history, questions of ethics and moral extensionism, and ecology, and also economics and conservation management. We must, as anthropologist Eduardo Cohen said, go beyond the human, meaning we in the humanities should spend more time examining the relations that people around the world maintain with non-human beings. History is more than just the story of humans or how they change landscapes or even the climate. It's about multi-species relations. Multi-species approaches to history and contemporary issues are not only anthropologically fashionable these days, but integral to understanding human social life. Imagine the history of deforestation, dredging, road building, or even the family pet from a multi-species perspective, combining history and ecology. So what would the humanities beyond the human look like? And what would it reveal? How do we get students to think about things from a different angle? I first began to reframe my understanding of environmental history and history more broadly as part of the College of Charleston Sustainability Literacy Institute. I definitely have to thank my colleagues here for their help with that. This institute brought ecologists, anthropologists, biologists, an array of scholars together to talk about environmental issues from an interdisciplinary perspective. Through workshops with the Institute, for example, I developed a small pedagogical exercise to use in the classroom and in the community to localize and make environmental history reconsider multi-species relations. And I outlined this pedagogical exercise because I think it could be useful to folks coming from other disciplines as well. It combines storytelling, oral history, ecology, and the arts, and it's had a nice reception in the classroom, but also in workshops in various parts of Latin America. In 2019, for example, I partnered with artists and scholars in Huatulco in southern Mexico at the Universidad del Mar to celebrate the 21st anniversary of the National Park of Huatulco. And I'll just briefly share a story from that workshop. After explaining some of the history of the park and walking along its many trails, we arrived to the beach and began to tell stories together. Specifically, we asked the group of high school and college students with us to reflect on their own environmental history and relationship with a specific animal, and account for how that relationship has changed or evolved over time. And we use drawing and using keywords to highlight this multi-species relationship. Then we shared and created an ecological collage of stories. As an example, I told my own multi-species relationship growing up in Florida with dolphins. When I was a kid growing up in Florida fishing, we used to wade through the marsh grass looking for redfish and mullet, and we would follow the dolphins to know where the mullet and redfish were along the edge of shallow and deep water. As a kid, it brought me a lot of joy to see dolphins and know where they were fishing too. And perhaps also they were using us to herd the mullet into deeper water. As we throw our cast net or fish, it would spook the mullet and they would go into deeper water where the dolphin were feeding. It was a multi-species relationship. And it was also a form of recreation and a form of local ecological semiotics. Each of us reading signs from the other species to know where to find food. In hindsight, it was a way to understand marsh grass ecology and trophic cascades as well, all from something that seems as simple as going fishing as a kid. I also explained that my relationship with dolphins emerged into activism through the school system. When I was a kid in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a movement for dolphin-free canned tuna. And still to this day, I can't eat canned tuna because we were so mobilized and concerned about the dolphins that were being killed in the Eastern tropical Pacific by the global capitalists and transnational companies fishing for tuna. Over 6 million dolphins were killed between the 1950s and the late 1980s, being trapped in these nets. And again, this is another multi-species relationship. Our desire for tuna and the expansion of the seafood industry, and specifically sushi and tuna, made it much more profitable to capture these yellowfin tuna with these big industrial mechanized forms of fishing. And they were specifically targeting dolphin because the tuna and the dolphin had a multi-species relationship. So we saw a triangulation. And it was also an insight into environmental regulation and economics, because part of the Marine Mammal Protection Act forced the US government to develop an embargo with those transnational companies until they developed dolphin-free tuna. So it was a victory from the school system through environmental activism to change that multi-species relationship. And then third, I talked about how dolphins also became a symbol for community. My favorite sports team growing up as a kid, I have to admit, was the Miami Dolphins. Maybe not anymore, but back then it was the Miami Dolphins. And the Dolphins symbolized a sense of community and sport in South Florida. At the same time, dolphins were being slaughtered in the Pacific Ocean. They were being marketed and commodified for the sports industry and sold as a form of leisure consumption. So we can see through the lens of a multi-species relationship with dolphins, a more dynamic perspective that accounts for ecology, history, economics, and politics, all through one species. And from the other students and community activists who were there on the beach with us that day, we heard heartening examples of the diversity of our relationship with the natural world. Students shared stories of turtles, jaguars, eagles, parrots, hummingbirds, and with the work of biologists, historians, and community activists, we were able to contextualize those experiences and relationships. Now, many of these species are sort of seen as gregarious and popular species, but it still offered a useful primer to get young people and community members to think about how nature isn't just out there and how climate change isn't something abstract, but also something each and every one of us knows about, can relate to, and potentially change. This multi-species approach to understanding the Anthropocene, this is a multi-species approach to understanding the Anthropocene that accounts not just for our impact on the climate or generically species extinction or decline, but a web of ecological relationships that links us to other animals and those animals to each other and us. So for your own experiences and perhaps teaching, consider your own multi-species relationships with other animals in the area you live or work. And imagine that relationship through an interdisciplinary lens, considering cultural, economic, political, and ecological relations. And I promise you that future generations will be glad you told and remember those stories. And I think the more and more we can think about these stories in an interdisciplinary way, the richer those stories will be as well. So that's what I have to share for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My name is Kate Millay. I teach in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry here at the College of Charleston. And I'm going to share my own story about my involvement with our quality enhancement plan centered on sustainability literacy, and sort of how I've developed some tools to maybe take a more positive take on something that is sometimes very hard for students to get their heads around. So, my background is in chemical education, so teaching general chemistry. My research and technical training is in analytical chemistry, so the field of chemistry dealing with how to make chemical measurements. But that field is critically important to understanding the chemistry of the environment and man's impact on it. And so that's how I became interested in environmental chemistry. And so I teach all of these courses to a variety of different students, from a general education course for non-science majors all the way up to a major, junior and senior level chemistry and biochemistry majors interested in environmental chemistry. And even at all of these different levels, I have found that these courses have been enhanced by infusing them with sustainability topics, because it gives students a great context for understanding the importance of understanding the chemical nature of things. And I think it's really pushed me, to grow my own teaching and really challenge me to think about a lot of these fields more broadly myself. Can do the next slide, please. There we go. So some of the most important, I think, evolutions in my teaching have been sort of centered around something that, as Dr. Welch mentioned, that we see sometimes in our students, especially I think this is becoming more and more of a problem, is that we get students it's not so much an issue of climate denial, but climate desperation, and where you get this attitude towards that we're screwed. Doesn't matter what we do. That no matter what, things are not going to get better. And so one of the things that I've been really trying to push myself to do is really kind of reframe my teaching and recenter my courses in a way that allows us to not gloss over these important issues, but to really highlight some examples of how we've been successful in handling them in the past. So if you could do the animation or the... And so one of my most favorite things to talk about in my class, and I actually really kind of foreground this very early in the semester, is talking about the Montreal Protocol. And of course, the depletion of the ozone layer was a big topic whenever I was younger. And so I really like to highlight this example of a case in which we had a big global environmental problem that required international cooperation, but that we're now seeing evidence of improvement, and we're now seeing the ozone layer restore itself. And if we hadn't had the Montreal Protocol, as you can see in this animation on the right, even though the ozone hole was primarily confined to over Antarctica, we would have seen that that ozone hole grow and grow and grow, and then really leave the rest of us that are at other latitudes more exposed to the harmful UV light. And but within students' lifetimes, the ozone layer should be back to its natural state. And a lot of times students are really surprised to hear that. And so that there has been past successes in this sort of area in which we need these international agreements to address really challenging environmental problems. Okay, next slide. And another, what I would call an environmental win that we can talk about within our own country is the effects of the Clean Air Act, and how air quality has improved substantially over the last 40 years. And students don't always have that perspective of having experienced really poor air quality firsthand. And so this is also a nice example to show students that we can see improvements. And so you see these different graphs from the EPA. On the left, we have carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide in the middle. So really important in smog type reactions. sulfur dioxide on the right, both nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Those are both big components of the precursors for acid rain. And so, the rain is not as acidic as it used to be. And that's because these regulations were put in place and that these regulations work. And so, that kind of starts to open up a door so we can start to have a conversation about designing solutions around climate change. And so, so then we'd start to talk about, can we take, what we've seen with the Montreal Protocol, what we've seen with improvements in air quality and water quality in our own country, can we take that, the lesson, what can we take from those experiences and apply them to this big problem of climate change? And so to illustrate this from a chemist perspective, you have these two very similar molecules, carbon monoxide on the left and carbon dioxide on the right. Carbon monoxide, as you saw in the previous slide, has gone down considerably because of different regulations and because of improvements in things like catalytic converters in cars. But in the case of carbon dioxide, this is an internal combustion engine releasing carbon dioxide is doing what an internal combustion engine is designed to do. And so then we start to talk about, well, what if we replace that with an electric car? And then you start to talk about everything that's required to build a battery. And then you also need to talk about, where is the electricity coming from? If it's coming from coal combustion, it's probably not much of an improvement at all in terms of CO2 emissions. In fact, it might be worse than if you had just had a traditional internal combustion engine. And so, and then we start to even talk more broadly, what is it about our society that demands us to all have vehicles? How are cities and suburbs designed to demand that we all have these things? And so you start to sort of take, a very narrow focus and sort of focus on these small molecules, but then try to expand things out into a broader scope of how you can understand a problem. And maybe the solution isn't a chemical one or a technological one, but maybe more of a social one. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And so this has really been a transition. I think it's something that's challenging for me too, even the way that different STEM curricula are designed. They tend to be very reductionist. We want to break things down into their more component parts. We want to have these sort of simple linear cause and effect sort of sequence of events to illustrate a particular concept. But the world just isn't that simple. And so I've been trying to although I think that, reductionist thinking can be useful, especially, whenever students are first learning things, to kind of simplify the world for them first, but to try to incorporate systems thinking more into my teaching, because, try to give students the tools to look at these problems more holistically that include different disciplines other than chemistry, and even other than science altogether, and really looking towards the social sciences and the humanities for some of our, inspiration and some of the tools that we could use to address some of these big problems. And so one of the challenges that we have in teaching about sustainability is that we often find ourselves here outside of our comfort zones. So whenever I first started teaching, I would just talk about chemistry. But now in my chemistry classes, I'm talking about systemic racism and how pollution is one form of systemic racism. And so I've been trying to model for my students, sort of some of the behaviors that I think might give them the tools and the competency to really address some of these problems. And a lot of that involves getting out of your comfort zone. And so I got out of my comfort zone big time myself this past semester whenever I taught a colloquium class called The Climate is Changing, Why Aren't We? Where I had students from a variety of different majors, and we, really took a lot of this systems thinking perspective. I relied pretty heavily on some essays from the Donella Meadows project that is online. I also used two books. One is this All We Can Save book. It's an excellent book of essays that really centers feminism as a way to frame some of our problems with climate change. And I thought that Project Drawdown was a great complement to that. And really wanted to shift our discussion, not so much of about the gloom and doom and about all of these challenges and all of these problems, but to really highlight for students that, we have a lot of the tools that we need to address this problem. We just need to put them in action. And so, really kind of getting students excited about some of these solutions, I thought was really productive. And I thought it really kind of shifted the we're screwed kind of mentality to one in which students had a lot more agency in engaging with these big problems. Another tool that another tool that I like to use is this global, this is a climate solution simulator where students can sort of envision different changes in how they can have an impact on climate change out to 2100. And so, we all see those scary trajectories going out to 2100 with the temperature ramping up. But what we want to see is help students sort of envision that better world. And also highlight the fact that there's really no one single silver bullet. It's not just about changing fossil fuels. It's also about how we use energy, how we sort of move around in the world. And so I have students, we do a workshop with this. I've also used this as a faculty exchange. I went to, for example, a political science class and then had the political scientists come to my class to share some things about political polarization with my class. And so I thought that that worked really well. And I don't think it would have happened on its own without the QEP. And then finally, for a final project, I liked also from the same group, Climate Interactive, they have this nice thing called a multi-solving flower in which students could sort of pick apart a specific climate solution. But this really highlighted a lot of the co-benefits. As we get off of fossil fuels, we're also going to improve air quality. And that's a huge social justice issue. If we enhance the accessibility of bikes in our city, then we're going to improve people's mobility and access to economic opportunity, not to mention getting people more active and engaged in their community. And so I found that to be a really helpful tool to help get students to think more broadly about these solutions as well. And so what I found in my teaching is that, teaching and learning about solutions is really empowering for students. And so just some of my sort of a quick summary is I really like to highlight these co-benefits that come along with our climate solutions, and also to highlight the fact that, there's not one single action that we can take. It's going to have to be multiple solutions. And so although that can be daunting, I think that students also get excited about it whenever they realize that they don't have to be good at science to be part of a climate solution. They don't have to be, an engineer to design a better engine. They can, create art that inspires people to envision a better world. And so it's certainly hard work, but it's beautiful work. And I think that I'm really happy to have been a part of this. And I think it's something that I will continue to incorporate in my teaching going forward.
So thank you all for watching those presentations from my excellent colleagues who I've been really thankful to have been champions of sustainability literacy at our campus. And really, we're excited to talk to you all, whoever watched this and will show up for a live panel. What does it mean to do interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary? Even now, people are talking about superdisciplinary teaching of sustainability, right? How do we get beyond just thinking about these problems through our own discipline, but actually doing this across campus, which is the challenge facing higher education moving forward. These students coming into college moving forward, they're very concerned about justice issues. They're going to need systems thinking competencies. They're going to have to find leverage points. And that's on all of us collectively to teach to them. And I think our collective experience, and this came out in Tier 2 a lot, is none of us were trained in how to do this. So we're learning on the fly ourselves, and it's daunting. And it needs resources, it needs support. So we look forward to talking to you about your experiences, question and answer, to talk more about our own experience collectively or individually in our own classes. So yeah, look forward to a rich discussion with you all. Thank you very much.